we're going to be talking about ways to reach campers and families that don't have a virtual option. We're going to talk about some barriers, some emerging practices that go along with those things, and about half the session we're going to take to workshop some ideas in small groups. If you have any questions or concerns throughout the session, utilize the chat box, unmute yourself, and feel free to interrupt if you want to. It is not going to throw me off. So let's, if we don't have any questions or concerns, I'm going to keep moving forward. So what we're going to talk about is definitely not a comprehensive approach to reaching campers with tech barriers, but it's just a starting point, and it'll be a framework that you can work from to ask questions for any activity you're trying to start or continue. The first thing is, here are some steps for some success. Like, how do we frame these programs that we're trying to engage in? What I looked for was asking questions. So questions get answers, and the questions I looked for were, what tools do we have right now? So we're taking the computer outside of the equation because there's tech barriers, but we can assume that people might have phone and they might have a mailbox, and that's what we're working from with these activities. With every program that you're starting, you do want to start with your why. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the who, the how, the when, the where, and the what of these programs. Where did I get these questions from? Not to nerd out too much, but I'm a big fan of logic models. It guides you. It's a roadmap for success for your programming. This is what one looks like for a hospital program. Sorry, I didn't have time to put one together for a programming for kids or families that don't have tech barriers, but you can see where I'm coming from. You're looking at inputs, your outputs, and your outcomes. That's what it comes down to. What tools do we have? Who are we trying to reach? And what's the outcome we're trying to achieve by doing these things? So we're going to start with our why. To me, the most important why is the mission of your organization. Why do you exist? Why are you around? What is the thing you're doing that no one else is doing for the population you serve? Ultimately, we're all, no matter what's written on paper, we're promoting connectedness. We want people to know that they're not alone in what they're going through. The other why is your stakeholder whys. Your external stakeholders that I've listed, again, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just a framework to go from. But your external stakeholders are like your community partners. So schools, other nonprofit organizations, potential donors. So who can you reach from what you're doing right now? And media outlets. Just a side note, if you haven't put a press release out on what you're doing, now is a great time to do that. That can be a different session, but I would suggest that everyone puts a press release out. Your news outlets are looking for ways to demonstrate what the community is doing during this time, and it's a great way to kind of drum up some funding that might not be there. And our internal stakeholders, so you're going to have to convince, you may have to convince people why you want to do these things. Why do we need to reach campers and families that have tech barriers when we have this virtual option that can reach, 20, 30, 40, 80% of our campers? So you're going to have to come up with a value proposition. You're going to have to convince your board members. You might have to convince people on your team why the need from this exists. You're going to have to convince volunteers. You're additionally going to have to convince campers and families of why you're doing this, why it looks different than what they're used to. And finally, you're going to have to convince donors. So when you're coming up with messaging, when you're coming up with your strategy for this, These are the elements that you want to consider outside of just like the what behind what you're doing. All right, the who. A lot of our programmings that exist right now are camper centric. So that means that you might have a camp program where it's the campers that come, it's the families that come, it's the sibling that come. There's some kind of like target population that comes to your camp programming. Well, when we're reaching people outside of the camp setting, we don't have as much control over that target population. So we're opening the population to whoever's in that household. So as much as we want to reach like a target population in this case, we need to consider that there are more populations within that household or who can be reached by the activities we're doing now. So even with a virtual camp program, you might have siblings that sit in on that session. So if you're sending a camp in a box or a letter to a family or making a phone call, you might be touching more than just the population you thought you were calling for. So being prepared to expand your programming to reach an extended population is really important during this time. Additionally, like, it doesn't have to be camper focused. It could be your donors during this time. It could be your board members. It could be your professional staff. Who are we reaching that needs to be reached, and build that connection right now? Building on the strategy, we want to consider the how. So this is how number one, focusing on strategy. You want to come up with some sort of communication plan. That means like you can still use email, even if it's technology barrier, because you can receive that on things like phone, you can receive it on various platforms, but you also want to be able to utilize your mailboxes, you want to utilize social media, you want to utilize as many different communication strategies you can, and you want to come up with a comprehensive approach. So it needs to be the broadest brush that you can come up with. The other thing you want to think about is, will this activity or program be a pickup or a mail out? One of the drawbacks to a mail out, and some of us face this when we're trying to reach out to campers now, are addresses are wrong. So if you're sending out stuff without checking those addresses, you might be sending a package or a letter to a group of campers or a camper that it's going to an address that the camper doesn't live at. The other thing is, you could do a pickup service. So similar to what food distribution's going on now, you can reach out to your schools in your system or other nonprofits that have had some success with delivering services through a pickup service. And you want to ask yourself, do we have the capacity as a staff? Do we have a capacity with our volunteers to do this program that we are aiming to do right now? Another thing for consideration is, are you going to take requests for the activity or program, or are you going to be sending these things out blindly? So are you going to take a contact list that you already have and just send out your camp shirts, your letters to campers, or are you going to have some kind of system put in place to take requests? And is that going to be an email, a text service, a phone call? Is there going to be someone responsible for taking those requests? Are you going to use an Excel spreadsheet to list those requests? Just some questions that you should consider when you are taking those requests or engaging in the process of distributing an activity or a camp in the box or whatever that looks like. Number two, like, first, do you have the funding to make whatever you're trying to do happen? One way of accounting for the funding is do a quick line item budget of the things you want to include and put in everything from pens to envelopes to letters to boxes to, if you want to have contents to a box, what did those price points look like? And at what level can we give those things out? So that's going to determine your capacity to send things out based on your price point and your staffing capacity. The other thing specifically about capacity, and we've talked about this a lot, is be sure you're not burning yourself out, like in the people around you, to make this stuff get done. Like, we do want to build this connection with campers during this time, but make sure you're aware of your self-health and the capacity you have and your team has to get this done. This is also a time to engage volunteers in the process too. So when you're thinking of your strategy for these activities and programs, think of ways to engage your volunteers and maybe even perhaps your families in this process. Additionally, this is a great time to request donations. So if you have an idea of the things you want to do, you can ask for those things. People want to give during this time. We look towards like historical similarities like this. If we go back to 9/11, people were much bigger givers during this time than after 9/11 or before 9/11. When you want to consider the timing is, have we done programming and activities leading up to this? Are we spacing out the dosage? Additionally, like, is this going to be a one-time thing, or is this going to be something people can request over time? Is this something that you're going to continue to do after the one-time or one-off thing? Think about those things in your planning stages, or communicate those things. So when you're asking for requests, should you set the expectation that this will be a one-time thing, or we're considering doing this more times? So let the people that you're giving these things to or engaging in know what to expect going forward. Additionally, the suggestion is to start small and scale up. So you can pilot a smaller program and build up to bigger things. That way you can work out the kinks, you can accept failure in those smaller things and learn to be able to scale up to bigger sections and bigger populations. We've talked about, you can host a pickup similar to like food distributions, lunch distributions. You can deliver things. So if you and your staff want to go visit campers in a social distancing protocol manner, take things to your campers. Of course, schedule those things. Don't just show up unannounced, but even just making that drive-by and letting people know that you are still there, we're still connected, really means a lot. You can send letters to campers, create a pen pal service with your campers, or have your campers write letters to hospital staff, to counselors, send pre-stamped letters and have them consolidate in one spot so you can distribute those as you wish. Additionally, use your phone. You can call campers, you can have a phone tree. Again, just letting people know they're not alone in what they're going through is really huge during this time. But it's also a desire we have, like, through our human nature. So some ideas that have come up that people have used to kind of break down these tech barriers, talking about phone calls. So that could be anything you want. It could be a text message, just to let people know, again, you're not alone in what you're going through. We're thinking about you. Here's a number that you can reach out to if you need anything. Facilitating those letters again, the social distancing visit, and camp in a box. So that's the hot ticket right now. We're going to have some sessions specifically about Camp in a Box, but just things to consider right now is when you are sending those things out, like make sure you're including instructions, detailed instructions. If it's an activity, make sure you're thinking about things like food insecurity. If you're sending a cooking activity, is there enough for everybody? Can anybody distinguish or interpret these instructions? Or is it like IKEA instructions? Is there enough for everyone in the household to take part in this? Because you don't know. And if there's not, explain why there's not. All right. Now, does anybody have any questions, anything they want to add before we head into this workshop phase? All right. So in just a minute, I'm going to pop a link to a Google Doc into the Zoom group chat. And I'll ask you to copy and paste that into a browser. And I'm going to break everybody up into a breakout group. You're going to have about 12 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes to assign a role to 3 people in the group. One's going to be a note taker. So in the Google Doc that I'm going to send out, that person will need to take some notes for your group. Additionally, there needs to be a timekeeper. So someone that can keep up with the 12 to 15 minutes to make sure you get through all of the questions and everybody has a chance to share. And finally, you need to nominate a reporter because we're going to come back to this big session and I'm going to ask you to share out your what you've discussed as a group. So in your group discussion, we want to talk about your thoughts about reaching families with tech barriers. What are the benefits and concerns? And we'd also like for you to come up with at least one way a camp could connect with families outside of virtual programming. All right, and then after 12 minutes, we're going to come back to the big group and the reporters will share 3 highlights of your group discussion.
To provide a meal. We've talked about getting either food donated, sending a food truck to a metro area if we have a restaurant partner that normally supports camp, or providing restaurant gift cards or food gift cards in the boxes. And I know that we're including recipes, for example. We also talked about parents not having respite for this week. We recently got an email from our state Respite Coalition. States have respite coalitions. I think their capacities are different, but they provide, or they can provide respite vouchers for parents that they can use to provide qualified paid care so they get some time away. That might be a post-quarantine idea, but it would still be something for families to have that camp normally provides them. And the third and final thing, let me check our notes. I know we had another thing. Oh, what was our third thing? Oh, the parade or a caravan to engage some of the volunteers, especially medical volunteers that won't otherwise get to see kids this year, and do some box deliveries, socially distanced, contact-free, in-person deliveries, so that at least those volunteers get to see their kids and the kids get to see those volunteers.
Casey, thank you for sharing those things. And I think you bring up a couple of good points. One is that, reaching out to your community partners is a great idea, learning from them. And another thing is when you do an assessment, if someone has an email address, like those situations are fluid too. Like just because you have an email address doesn't mean you have access to technology you need for virtual programming. And the other thing is just because you have access to virtual programming now doesn't mean you'll have it in the future. So just being considerate of those changing and the fluidity of what situations look like for your families too.
We talked a little bit just about, we're very interested about the Camp in the Box idea, and we COCA is working on that. But also just trying to think about activity ideas that we could send to kids that does not require, obviously, the technical need. Things they can do outside, get them off the screen. The puzzles or trivia, scavenger hunts, things like that. So just really, about all we had time for. But
I think we're group 3. So some of us are already doing some virtual things, and some will be doing virtual things. And, a lot of things we're doing do involve technology, but some don't. So different types of comments were made. I mean, for where we're based in New York, and what I'm finding is a lot of our families, especially New York City families, some of the school systems will give them pads or Chromebooks or whatever, but then they're going to take them back for the summer. So in fact, I spoke to one family today that's going to lose that. So, one thought is, will donors give, or maybe at least could they lend them for the summer somehow? We can get donors to give us, some pads or something for the summer so the kids can continue with the technology. When the Camp in the Box came up a number of times during Camp in the Box. One thing that came up was about mentioned already about recipes, to make it a very, very inclusive box. And, for the ingredients, to send gift cards. We're not going to send flour in the mail, but, send the gift card so they can get everything, keep the recipe simple, fun for the whole family. And then people can take photos. So even if you don't have a computer, you've got a phone, take a photo, send it in. People can share the photos around or send photos back, a lot of photos going back and forth. So that idea came up. And then someone was talking about fishing, the fishing expedition that one of the camps do, but that's a little bit harder. I guess you could share photos of that, or photos of the activities. So that kind of was it, basically. One issue came up too was about teenagers, how to deal with teens. Some of their technology, some of what they're using is changing. It's almost a challenge also. They're not on Facebook. How do we keep up with their changing technology or their changing interests? So, we didn't really come up with a solution to that, but we have to something we all have to figure out is how to deal with teens. So that's it.
I think you bring up a really good point, Robin. Like, I know a while ago, as camps, we were like, we're never going to get on Facebook. And then here we are on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. Like, how do we balance out, cybersecurity and social bullying with the engagement we have with campers on social media? So I think that's going to be a pretty consistent debate and exploration with social media and how we engage with campers on those platforms.
On that point of how we connect the teens with what Robin was saying, and this might be like a really simple, and like everyone obviously has the answer thing, but having a hashtag to monitor. And so, obviously kids are going to choose if they want to use that hashtag or not, but parents can use it, and that'll be something that we can monitor throughout that week and leading up to and afterwards. That I don't know how TikTok works, so I'm not going to speak on that, but I know with like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, you can search that one hashtag. So that's kind of our plan as to how to see content they're posting. But I am group 4 reporter, surprise, surprise. And our 3 things that we kind of talked about was some of the technology barriers. One thing that did come up is the fairness of it, of if we're going to provide tech to certain families. Also, how does that liability work? What if it does come back damaged, but we're a nonprofit offering resource? What does that look like for us? And how are we providing those to the families? But we also talked about getting the surveys out to families as we're doing registration. And so asking, do they have the one-to-ones? If they don't have a one-to-one, are they off? Do they have a household unit technology that they can use? And so how do we change our content and programming for that? We also talked about ways that we can connect with them without technology. And John Wayne had a really great point here about they're going to take all of their activities and create a PowerPoint for instructions and how-tos and put that in their box so that they are able, if the kids don't have access to Zoom or something like that, they're still going to have those instructions to it. And I think that's a really great point. Something that we always talk about is like once the box leaves our hands, it's literally and figuratively out of our hands. And so if a kid gets that box on Sunday and rips through it, like that's all them, but at least they'll have those instructions. So I think that's a great point. And the last one I had from our group was using snail mail to send out either registration information or registration information that can be sent to their houses. So if an email changes, that they'll at least have that. I know addresses are constantly in flux, but also working with our hospitals that we're connected with and making sure that their child life specialists or those who are involved with can also share that news for the kids that are in the hospital, because we've said it once, we'll say it 100 times, like this is Camp in a Box is a great resource for those kids in the hospital rooms during that week for us. So those were our three main things.
MJ, really quick, for those of us that don't know about hashtags, can you give us a quick overview of hashtags and what's the benefit of having that, and how do you get the word out about what hashtag you're using?
Yeah, so great question. Glad you asked. I'll do the best that I can here. Basically, what's funny is when my grandparents asked, my other grandparent tried to explain, it's just like a phone number. And if you call that phone number, it'll send it to that number, that person. So if we use the hashtag Camp in a Box, for example, on Facebook, it'll go blue and you'll click on it, and it'll also send into the feed of others who have their privacy settings open to public or however it works, and they will be able to see that feed as well. Same thing with Instagram. If you put that hashtag on there, it's a # as well for those. You hit the #, type a word in. And so right now we don't have our official how we're going to announce that necessarily, but I know through Facebook and also through communication with our parents, that's something that we'll use to get the word out, either through that snail mail and putting it on that design. So you're like, oh, what's this hashtag? And you can search it, and we can have posts about it that are going to say, hey, we're using this post. Something that I had talked to our communications about is just like Disney did back on May 4th, is they said, hey, if you use the hashtag May the 4th be with you or whatever, you are giving us permission to repost your content. And so making sure that there is that acceptance and agreement that says, hey, this is kind of our content if you use that hashtag. And so just something to think about. But yeah, search a hashtag every once in a while, see what happens. CHD, what is it? Oh shoot, what's ours? CH Digital is ours. So if you just want to try that one out, see what pops up.
Thank you very much for that quick hashtag overview. One other thing that you brought up was instructions. When you do send out instructions, before you do that, try getting someone that is not familiar with camp to read the instructions first, because they normally bring up some really good points about like things you might have missed, or things you want to include, or things you could leave out. And it could be anybody. So like your friend that has nothing to do with camp is a great person to reach out to.
They're sending out a survey to kind of see what families are saying. With our registration, there's questions in there that talk about it. And we talked about, just like some of the other groups mentioned, the different grants that popped up today that can help with technology potentially. We also are looking into Wi-Fi hotspots and checking if the schools are going to leave the equipment there, if they're taking it back in. Have to give a shout out to Erin from Rise Above and changing the Camp in a Box to Happy Camper Kits, which I think that terminology is really cool. So they're really trying to put a lot of things in that help kids disconnect, and like jokes and different ideas, and they're going to do in order to kind of accommodate their families, they're going to do several different parade buys for kids, different areas for them to come pick up their boxes. And they're really thought about how many kids are going to be in the household. So if they have 1 to 2 kids, they'll have 1 box. And if they have 3 to 4 kids, they'll have 2 boxes. But cost-wise, they're going to leave it at no families get more than 2 boxes. And we had some discussion about how do you make all that developmentally appropriate, thinking about the different ages within there, and really just kind of making things as simple as possible, and doing the best that we can. for the time frame that we have. They're looking at a pen pal program as well. We talked a lot also about sharing the photos and those ideas. With our camp, we're doing the virtual programming in the morning, and then we're sending them out with a challenge for the afternoon to do something active, and it'll be a different active challenge every day, and coming back for cabin chat in the evening and talking about that along with their other cabin chat things. So it sounds like a lot of us are on the same page. I did have a question for the first group, I think, or the second group. What was the respite from the states? You said every state has a respite program?
So this was an email that we received out of the blue. It's not an existing partnership, and Ian can jump in anytime if I'm saying things that are not specifically true. But we got an email from our from a Respite Coalition in South Carolina, and they basically said, you know, on a normal basis, we offer $500 vouchers to families, typically families of like a child with a significant disability or something like that. And the vouchers can be used not to pay family members who would normally provide care and not to supplant like state funded paid care, but for pure respite, like you can hire a babysitter, you can hire someone while the parent has respite. So that's not a deep relationship that we have. It was recent and new to us, but definitely something to explore, probably, you know, for our families year round.